The first thing I want you to understand is that we heard the sirens before we heard the words. Not the tornado sirens. Not the ones the town tests on the first Wednesday of every month at noon. These were different. Higher, closer. And by the time my phone finally buzzed with the emergency alert, I was already standing at the end of my driveway watching 2 county trucks and a boxy white van block the intersection at Miller Road. And a man in a reflective vest was arguing with my neighbor Ray about whether Ray could drive to the pharmacy. That's the part that I keep coming back to. Not the sirens, not the alert. The order. Barricade first. Warning second. Whatever they knew it early enough to put steel and cones on our road before the county-wide notification system got around to telling us there was anything to worry about at all. My name doesn't matter much for this. I worked as a maintenance supervisor for a small mobile home park just outside a town I'll call Beaumont Hollow, in a part of the country where the highways narrow into 2 lanes, and the 2 lanes narrow into county routes, and the county routes eventually give up and turn to gravel. I'm 41. I live alone in the manager's unit at the front of the park, a double wide with a leaky skylight and a front porch that faces the entry road. My job, more or less, is to keep 62 homes from falling apart faster than the owners can afford to fix them, to plow the loop in winter, to shut off water lines when a pipe bursts, and to explain to the elderly residents why the internet is out again. It is not a glamorous job. It is, however, the kind of job that teaches you what a neighborhood really is. You learn which trailer has the oxygen tank, which one has the baby, which one has the man who drinks and shouldn't drive, which one has the woman who leaves her dog tied out too long. You learn people, and you learn them faster than they'd like. I mention all of this because when the road was barricaded, I was the one everyone came to. Not because I'm brave, because I have keys. Let me back up. That morning was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are when the recycling truck comes through the park, and I have to move my own bin last, after I've helped Mrs. Alderman drag hers out from behind her deck. She's 83, and she pretends she doesn't need help, and I pretend I'm just passing by. It's a game we play. That Tuesday, the recycling truck didn't come. I noticed at about 9:30 because the bins were still lined up at the curbs like teeth in a broken jaw. I checked my email. No route change notice. I called the county sanitation office and got a hold message that ended in a beep and then silence, which is not how their hold system usually works. Usually it loops. This one just cut out. I told myself the phone system was glitching. That was my first lie to myself, and I want to be honest about it because I told myself a lot of them that day, and I'd like to lay them out where I can see them. The second thing I noticed was that the school bus didn't stop at the corner of Route 12 and the park entrance to pick up the Hoban twins. I know their schedule because their mother works the early shift at the hospital and their grandmother, who watches them, doesn't drive. And I've had to jump her old sedan more times than I can count. The twins are usually standing at the corner at 7:42. On Tuesday, they were still there at 7:55. And their grandmother was standing on her porch in a robe watching the road. And when I walked up to ask if the bus was late, she said the school had called and canceled classes. But the recorded message hadn't given a reason. Just, no school today. Please keep your children home. Further updates to follow. Snow day? I said, even though there was no snow, and it was mid-October, and the sky was that thin blue that promises nothing. They didn't say, she told me. The message was strange. It didn't sound like Principal Ruiz. It sounded like it was read from a card. I told her not to worry about it and walked back to my truck, and I made a note in my head to check the school district website when I got a chance. And then I forgot, because the water pressure had dropped in units 14 through 19, and I had to go crawl under a home to look at a valve. That was the third thing, and I didn't count it as a thing at the time. Water pressure drops. That's normal. But I want to say now for the record that our municipal supply had never dropped in that section without a work order posted. And there was no work order. By 11, I was back at my office, which is really just the front room of the double-wide with a filing cabinet and a coffee maker and a landline that only rings when someone's furnace has died. I made coffee. I checked my phone. There were 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. No voicemail. There was a text from my sister that just said, "You seeing this?" with no other context. She lives 4 hours away. I texted back, "Seeing what?" and I watched the little delivery indicator turn to a single check mark and stop there. It didn't say delivered. It didn't say read. Just sent and hanging. That was when I first felt something cold settle low in my chest. Not fear yet. Just the recognition that too many small things had gone quietly wrong in one morning. And none of them had explanations. And none of them were talking to each other. I want to describe the layout of the park because it matters for what came next. We have one entrance off Miller Road, which is a 2-lane county road that runs east to Route 12 and west to the county line. Miller Road is our only paved access. There's a service track behind the park, cut through a wooded lot that comes out on an unmarked gravel road. But it's chained and padlocked, and I'm the one who has the key to that chain. Beyond the park itself, we've got 62 homes arranged in a horseshoe around a central loop, with a playground in the middle and a laundry building near the front. The community mailbox is by the entrance sign. There's one dumpster area, one propane tank rack, and one shared well that supplements the municipal line during the summer. The families in the park are mostly older, mostly retired, with a few younger households. The Hobins, a young couple named Marcus and Deja with a newborn, a woman named Trish, who works nights and has 3 dogs. Ray, the neighbor arguing with the man in the reflective vest, is a retired postal carrier who thinks he still knows every road in the county better than the people who paved them. He's usually right. At 11:40, I heard the first of the sirens. Not fire trucks, not ambulances. Something farther out. A low, steady wail that didn't cycle up and down the way tornado sirens do. It just held one note, then paused, then held it again. It came from the direction of town. I stepped out onto the porch and listened. It went on for maybe 3 minutes and then stopped, and no announcement followed. 2 minutes later, Ray came pounding up my porch steps. He had his cap in his hand and his face was red, and I could tell he'd been running, and Ray is not a man who runs. "There's a truck at the end of the road," he said. "County, and a van. They put up barricades." "Barricades for what?" "They won't say. They just told me to turn around." I remember I was still holding my coffee, and I looked down at it, and I set it on the porch rail like it was suddenly very important that I not spill it. Was there an accident? No accident. Nothing. Just cones and a sawhorse and a guy in a vest telling me to go home. Which way was he telling you to go home from? Ray looked at me. It took him a second. Then he said, "That's the thing." He said, "Go home. But my home is on the other side of that road." He was pointing me back this way, into the park. That's when I started to understand the shape of it. Or I thought I did. I still didn't know what it was, but I understood that we had been closed in, and that whoever closed us in wanted us on this side, not the other, which meant they thought whatever was happening was on the other side. Or they thought we were the other side, and they didn't want us going anywhere. I told Ray to stay put, and I got in my truck and drove down to the entrance. The barricade was exactly what he described. 2 orange and white plastic sawhorses, a line of cones, a county Department of Transportation pickup, and a boxy white van with no markings that I could see except for a small decal on the driver's door that looked like a state seal, but wasn't one I recognized. There were 3 men, one in a DOT vest, one in what looked like a paramedic uniform but wasn't quite, one in plain clothes with a radio clipped to his belt and a lanyard around his neck. The DOT man saw me coming and stepped out into the road with his palm up. I rolled down my window. "What's going on?" "Road's closed, sir. Please turn around." "I live here. I run this park." "What's the closure for?" "Precautionary. We're asking everyone to stay home and shelter in place until further notice." "For what?" He didn't answer that. He looked past me, back into the park. "Are there residents who might try to leave?" 62 homes worth. He nodded slowly, like that was information he'd expected but hadn't wanted. Then he said, We'd appreciate it if you could help us keep them calm. There will be an alert going out shortly with instructions." "An alert about what?" The man in plain clothes stepped forward. He had the look of someone who was used to giving bad news in small doses. "Sir, we understand you have questions. We're not authorized to answer them yet. Please return to your residence. When the alert comes through, everything will be clearer." "Is it a chemical thing? Is it the water?" I was grasping. I wanted a word I could hold. "Is somebody sick?" He met my eyes for exactly 1 second, and in that second I saw him decide not to lie to me, and also not to tell me the truth. He said, "Please go home." I went home. I want to describe what the drive back into the park felt like, because I don't think I've ever felt anything quite like it before, or since. It's about a 1/4 mile from the entrance to my office. I drove it at maybe 10 miles an hour. On either side of me, people were coming out onto their porches. Some had heard the sirens. Some had heard Ray. Some were just doing what old people in trailer parks do on Tuesday mornings, which is stand on porches and wait for something to happen. They watched me drive past. I watched them back. I remember thinking very clearly that I needed to figure out what to say to them, and that I needed to figure it out fast, because they were going to ask, and I didn't have any real answers. And the answers I did have were going to sound like panic if I said them wrong. I parked at my office. I went inside. I locked the door behind me, which I never do during the day. Then I sat down at my desk and I opened my phone and I stared at it, waiting for the alert. It came at 12:14 p.m. I remember the time because I was watching the clock. The phone buzzed, hard, 3 times in that distinctive stuttered pattern that emergency alerts use, and the screen went yellow, and the text was short. "Civil emergency. Stay indoors. Do not travel. Avoid contact with unknown persons. Further instructions will follow. This is not a test." That was it. No what, no why, no how long, no where. I read it 3 times. Then I put the phone face down on the desk, and I sat for a minute, and I tried to breathe in the way my ex-wife used to tell me to breathe when I got wound up about work, which was in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. I got through 1 round of it before someone started pounding on my office door. It was Trish, the woman with the 3 dogs. She was in sweatpants and a hoodie, and she hadn't put her hair up, which for Trish was the equivalent of running out of the house in a bathrobe. She had her phone in her hand, and she was holding it up to me like proof. "You got it too?" she said. "I got it." "What is this? What does this mean?" "I don't know yet." "Avoid contact with unknown persons." What does that even mean? Like strangers? Like sick people? Is it sick people? "I don't know, Trish. My kids are at their dad's. My kids are at their dad's in Beaumont Hollow. I need to go get them." "The road's closed." She stopped. She looked at me. "What do you mean the road's closed?" "The county has it barricaded at the end of the drive. They're not letting anyone through." "Then I'll take Miller East." "Trish, or the back way through." "Trish." She stopped talking. Her mouth was open a little. I could see her working through it, running through every route she knew, and I could see the moment she understood that if they'd closed Miller, they'd closed everything. You don't close one road in a county like ours. Miller connects to Route 12, and Route 12 connects to the state road, and if they didn't want us on Miller, they didn't want us on any of them. And she knew it. "How old are your kids?" I asked her. 7 and 10. "Is your ex a decent man?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. He's decent. He'll keep them inside. Then he'll keep them inside." She started to cry a little, quietly, the way people cry when they're trying not to. I didn't know what to do with that, and I still don't, so I did the only thing I could think of, which was to walk her back to her home and check on her dogs, and make sure her door's locked and tell her I'd come by later. By the time I got back to my office, there were 6 people on my porch. I want to say something about panic here. Panic is not what you think it is. It's not screaming. It's not running around. Panic, in ordinary people in ordinary places, looks like standing very still and asking the same question 3 different ways, because none of the answers are the one you want. Panic looks like Mr. Delgado from Unit 22 asking me, very politely, whether the alert meant it was safe to walk his dog. Panic looks like Mrs. Alderman standing on my porch in her housecoat clutching a plastic bag of prescription bottles and asking me if I could drive her to the pharmacy because she was running low on the yellow pills, and the yellow pills were the important ones. Panic looks like Marcus, the young father, holding his newborn against his chest and asking me, in a voice that was almost embarrassed, whether I thought the water was safe to make formula with. I did not have answers. I had guesses. I gave them what I had. I told Mr. Delgado to walk his dog inside the park, not out on the road. I told Mrs. Alderman I couldn't drive her to the pharmacy because the road was closed, and I asked her how many days of pills she had left, and she said 4. I told Marcus that the water was probably fine, but that if he had bottled water, use that first for the baby just to be safe. I told the other 3, whose names I don't need to bother with here, to go home and stay off the road and check on each other and let me know if anyone in the park was sick. That last part was the one that made them all stop. "Sick how?" one of them said. "Sick anything," I said. "Fever, confusion, bad behavior. Just if you know someone who seems off, tell me." The word confusion landed harder than I meant it to. I saw it land. I saw them all catch it. And I realized then that I'd been thinking about that word since the DOT man wouldn't say what the closure was for, since the school called it a no school day without giving a reason, since the recorded message that sounded like it was read off a card. Confusion, bad behavior, avoid contact with unknown persons. I went inside and I closed the door and I sat down at my desk again and I opened my laptop and I tried 3 different news sites. 2 loaded. One of them had a banner at the top that said, "Developing Story," and the story below it was about a shelter-in-place order in a county 2 states over. The other had nothing. The 3rd site wouldn't load at all. I tried the local radio station's website. It played a loop of the station's ID and then dead air. I tried the county's emergency management page. It had a red banner that said, "Please stay tuned for updates," and a phone number. I called the phone number. It rang 12 times and then a voice picked up that was clearly a person, not a machine, and she said, "Emergency line, please hold." And I held for 8 minutes and then the call dropped. I called my sister. It went to voicemail. I texted her. The message showed sent, not delivered. I opened my truck's radio. Static on most stations. On one of the AM bands, I caught a fragment of what sounded like a state trooper's dispatch clipped. Professional. Using codes I didn't recognize. And then the signal slid away. I sat there in the truck for a long time. It was 1 in the afternoon. Everything looked normal. The trees were fine. The sky was fine. 2 doors down, Mrs. Alderman had come back out onto her porch and was watering a hanging plant, which she did every afternoon whether it needed it or not. A crow was on the dumpster lid. Somewhere in the park, a screen door slammed. And I understood, sitting there, that whatever was happening quietly. Whatever they were afraid of hadn't reached us yet, or if it had, it was moving so slowly and so silently that none of us could see it. The barricade wasn't there to stop something visible. It was there to stop something that hadn't shown itself. I want to tell you what I did next, because it was the first real decision I made, and I've thought about it a lot since. I got out of the truck and I walked to the storage shed behind the office. I unlocked it. Inside, I keep the park's tools: a chainsaw, a generator, extension cords, spare propane tanks, snow shovels, a case of bottled water I'd bought last summer for a heat wave and never opened, a first aid kit that was mostly Band-Aids and expired antiseptic, a hand crank emergency radio that had been in the shed since before I took the job. I checked the radio. The crank worked. The batteries in it were dead, but I had loose ones on a shelf that I hadn't touched in a year. I loaded new batteries. I turned it on. Static. I turned the dial slowly through the AM band. On 1590, I caught a voice. It was a man. He was reading, not talking. He said, "Urged to remain in their homes. Do not attempt to travel. Do not approach persons exhibiting signs of aggression, confusion, or disorientation. Persons displaying such signs should be reported to local authorities. Do not attempt to restrain them yourself. Repeat, do not attempt to restrain them yourself. And then he read the whole thing again, exactly the same way, from the beginning. I let it loop 3 times. On the 3rd time, I noticed something. In between one loop and the next, there was a 2-second pause. And in that pause, very faintly, I heard another voice in the background of the recording. Not part of the script. A woman saying something short. Something like, "How long?" I turned it off. I went inside and I sat down and I made a list. I want to be careful how I describe this list, because I don't want it to sound like a prepper checklist. I wasn't preparing for the end of the world. I was preparing for the next 48 hours in a mobile home park with 62 units and no way out. That's a smaller and more specific problem, and it has smaller and more specific answers. I wrote down water, propane, medications, baby, dogs, elderly, diabetic, oxygen, radio. Underwater, I wrote 60 gallons in shed, well pump works on power, filter unknown quality, ask around. Under propane, I wrote full tank at rack, most units have their own, cold nights coming. Under medications, I wrote the names of every resident I could think of who I knew was on something. Mrs. Alderman, whose yellow pills I didn't know the name of. Mr. Delgado, who had a heart condition. A woman in Unit 39 who I was pretty sure was diabetic because I'd once helped her carry in a case of glucose tabs. An old man in 51 who used a portable oxygen concentrator. I did not know how much of anything anyone had. That was the first thing I had to find out. Under baby, I wrote Marcus and Deja, Unit 8, formula, diapers, ask. Under dogs, I wrote Trish, Unit 44, 3 dogs, food. 2 other households with dogs I couldn't remember offhand. Under elderly, I wrote a list of 10 names. Under diabetic, 1. Under oxygen, 1. Under radio, I wrote check every hour. Then I sat and looked at the list, and I thought about the fact that I had, without meaning to, made myself the person who was going to keep 62 homes alive. I don't say that to sound noble. I say it because it scared me. I didn't ask for that. I wasn't qualified for that. I was a guy who fixed valves and plowed a loop road and helped an old lady with her recycling. I was not a leader. I did not want to be a leader. But there was no one else. Ray was 72 and had bad knees. Trish had her own problems. Marcus was a father with a newborn. Everyone else was older or younger or otherwise not in a position to walk 62 homes and knock on 62 doors and ask 62 households what they had and what they needed. So I did that. I want to tell you how that walk went, because it took me the rest of the afternoon and into the evening, and it changed how I understood the park. Most people opened the door. A few didn't. The ones who didn't, I made notes about and planned to check on later. The ones who did open the door mostly wanted me to tell them what was happening, and I told them the truth, which was that I didn't know, and that the road was closed, and that I was going through the park to figure out who needed what. I asked about medicine. I asked about food. I asked about water storage. I asked, as gently as I could, whether anyone in the household was feeling unwell. That last question got me a lot of long looks. At Unit 17, an old man named Cy told me that his wife had come down with something the day before. Fever. Wasn't making sense. He'd wanted to take her to urgent care, but she'd said she just wanted to sleep it off, and now she was still sleeping and he couldn't wake her up all the way. I asked if I could look in. He hesitated. Then he stepped aside. She was in the back bedroom. She was breathing. Her eyes were half open and she didn't track me when I came in. Her skin was hot. I did not touch her. Cy stood in the doorway and watched me watch her, and after a minute he said, in a very small voice, "Is she going to be okay?" I said, "I think she needs a doctor." He said, "The line at the clinic just rings." I said, "I know." I stood there for another minute, and I looked at that woman, whose name was Helen and whose recycling I had also carried out on Tuesdays, And I thought about the alert. Avoid contact with unknown persons. Persons displaying signs of aggression, confusion, or disorientation. Do not attempt to restrain them. She was not aggressive. She was barely conscious, but she was confused. She was disoriented, and I did not know if what she had was what they were afraid of, or if it was just the flu, or if it was something else entirely. But I knew that I was standing in a bedroom with a sick woman and no way to get her help, and that the barricade at the end of the road was the reason. I stepped back into the hall. I asked Cy if he had a mask. He said he had one from when he'd painted the porch last summer. I told him to put it on when he was in the room with her. I told him to keep her hydrated if he could, water on her lips at least. I told him to come get me if she got worse, or if she got up and started walking around and wasn't herself. He looked at me strangely when I said that last part. I did not explain. I left Unit 17 and I walked out to the road and I stood in the middle of the loop for a minute and I looked up at the sky. The sun was going down. The light had turned that thin gold color it gets in October just before it disappears. Somewhere in the park, a wind chime was ringing. I want to tell you about the alert that came next, because it was the one that changed things. It came at 6:47 p.m. Not the stuttered emergency buzz this time. A different tone. Longer. My phone said emergency broadcast across the top and the text was longer than the last one. Quarantine order in effect for counties listed. Residents must remain at current location. Travel is prohibited. National Guard units deployed to secure perimeter. Do not approach barricades. Do not attempt to cross county lines. Medical emergencies. Dial posted hotline. Food and medical supplies will be delivered to designated distribution points. Report persons exhibiting fever, confusion, or aggression to authorities. Do not attempt to transport such persons yourself. There was a hotline number. I called it. Busy signal. I called it again. Busy. I read the alert 3 more times. Quarantine, National Guard, perimeter. I sat on my porch for a long time and I watched the light drain out of the sky and I thought about what quarantine meant. Quarantine meant they thought whatever it was could spread. Quarantine meant they thought it was already in here with us. Quarantine meant that the men at the end of the road weren't there to keep something out. They were there to keep us in. I thought about Helen in Unit 17. I thought about the fact that I had stood in her bedroom without a mask. I thought about the fact that I had then walked to 40 other units and knocked on 40 other doors. I sat on the porch and I put my head in my hands, and I did not cry, but I came close. That night, I did not sleep much. I lay in bed with the emergency radio next to me on the pillow, turned low, cycling through the loop. Every hour, I got up and I walked out onto the porch and I listened. The park was quiet. Too quiet. No traffic on Miller. No planes. Once, around 2 in the morning, I heard a helicopter far off, moving south. Then nothing. At around 4, I heard a scream. It was short, cut off. It came from the direction of Unit 17. I got dressed. I put on my boots. I put a flashlight in my pocket and I took the fire extinguisher off its bracket by the door because it was the closest thing I had to a weapon, and because I did not want to think of it as a weapon, and because carrying it out into the dark let me pretend I was going to a fire. I walked to Unit 17. The porch light was on. The front door was open. Not wide. A few inches. I knocked on the frame. Sigh? Nothing. I pushed the door open with the extinguisher. The living room was empty. The TV was off. There was a coffee cup on the side table, tipped over. The coffee soaked into a magazine. Sigh! I heard a sound from the back of the trailer. Not a scream. A sound like a chair scraping. I did not go back there. I want to be honest about this. I did not go back there. I stood in that living room and I called Sigh's name twice more and I got no answer. And I heard the chair scraping sound again. And then I heard something else. Something wet and small and rhythmic. And I turned around and I walked out of that trailer and I closed the door behind me. And I stood on the porch and I called 911. And 911 rang and rang and rang and did not pick up. I do not know what was in that back bedroom. I have my guesses. I have carried those guesses with me every day since, and I will not put them into words here because the words are not the point. The point is that I closed the door and I walked away, and I do not know if Cy was still alive when I did it, and I do not know if I could have done anything for him if he was, and I have to live with the not knowing. I walked back to my office in the dark. I locked the door behind me. I sat down at the desk. I picked up the phone and I called the hotline again. Busy. I called 911 again. Rang, rang, rang. At 5 in the morning, I made an announcement. I have a small PA system that I use maybe twice a year to tell the park about a water main repair or a scheduled outage. It's a horn speaker on a pole by the office and a microphone on my desk. I turned it on. I keyed the mic. My voice came out over the park sounding thin and small, like it was traveling through a bad radio. I said, "This is your park manager. I need everyone to stay in their homes. Do not go to Unit 17. Do not go to Unit 17 for any reason. If you have not heard from a neighbor in the last 12 hours, do not check on them yourself. Come to my office and tell me. I repeat, do not go to Unit 17. I released the mic. I sat there and I listened to the park. Nothing moved. By sunrise, I had 5 people on my porch. Ray was one of them. He had a shotgun. He'd brought it from home, and he was holding it pointed at the ground. And I understood without asking that Ray, who had walked mail routes for 38 years and knew every dog in 3 townships, had already understood something I had only started to understand. That we were not going to be rescued in a hurry. That the barricades were not going to open. That whatever was in Unit 17 was not going to be the only Unit 17. He didn't say any of that. What he said was, "I want to help. Tell me what to do." I told him what to do. I told all of them what to do. I said we needed to know who was still healthy and who wasn't. I said we needed to consolidate what medicine we had and figure out who needed what. I said we needed to know how much water was in the shed and how much was in the well. I said we needed someone to keep watch on the road, in case the barricade opened or in case anyone tried to come in. I said we needed someone to keep watch on Unit 17 from a distance and to tell me if anything came out of it. Ray took the road. A woman named Priya, who I hadn't known well before that morning but who I would come to trust more than almost anyone I've ever met, took the medicine list. A man named Doug, retired Navy, took the water. A younger woman named Lena, who worked from home as a bookkeeper and had a very calm voice, took the phones. She would keep dialing every emergency number every 15 minutes and log what happened. And I took the walk again, unit by unit, to see who was still with us. I want to tell you about that second walk, because it was different from the first. Most doors opened. Some didn't. The ones that didn't, I marked. I did not force any of them. I did not have the right, and I did not have the stomach. At Unit 39, the woman I thought was diabetic came to the door and told me she had 6 days of insulin left and that it needed to be refrigerated, and that her refrigerator was working fine for now, but she didn't know what would happen if the power went out. I told her we had a generator. I did not tell her how much fuel we had for it. At Unit 51, the old man with the oxygen concentrator answered the door in his bathrobe and told me his machine ran on wall power and that he had 2 portable tanks for backup, and that each tank was good for about 4 hours. I did the math in my head. 8 hours of backup. If the power stayed on, indefinite. If it went out, 8 hours before we had a problem I could not solve. At Unit 8, Marcus opened the door with the baby on his shoulder and Deja standing behind him. And he told me they had about a week of formula, and I told him to make it last 2, and he looked at me and he nodded. And I understood that he had already been making it last 2 before I said anything. At Unit 44, Trish opened the door and her eyes were red and she asked me if I had heard anything from town. And I said no, and she nodded, and she closed the door again. And I stood on her porch for a minute, and I listened to her 3 dogs whining softly on the other side of it. At Unit 17, I did not go back. Doug and Ray had rigged a chair on the road facing that trailer, and one of them was in it at all times. By that afternoon, we had a list. 62 units, 58 households responding, 4 not. Of the 4 not responding, 1 was a family we knew was on vacation. 1 was a woman who worked overnight shifts and might have been sleeping. 2 were unknown. We watched those 2. Of the 58 responding, 41 had enough food for a week. 12 had enough for 2 weeks. 5 had almost nothing because they lived paycheck to paycheck and had been planning to shop that Wednesday. We pooled, Priya organized. People gave what they could. Of medications, we had a range of problems. The insulin was the worst. Mrs. Alderman's yellow pills turned out to be for her thyroid, and she had 2 weeks. Mr. Delgado's heart medication had 10 days. There were 3 other prescriptions I hadn't known about, all with different amounts left, none of them enough. Of water, Doug reported that we had roughly 60 gallons in the shed, plus whatever residents had in their own homes, plus the well, which was working. He didn't trust the municipal supply, and neither did I, though nothing about it had visibly changed. He recommended we start using bottled and well water for drinking and cooking, and municipal only for washing until we knew more. We agreed. Of the phones, Lena reported that 911 rang without answer. The hotline was busy. The county emergency line, when it did pick up, put you on hold and eventually dropped the call. Cell service was still working, technically, but calls out of the county were failing more often than they were succeeding. Text messages sometimes went through and sometimes didn't. Of the road, Ray reported that the barricade was still there, that the crew had rotated twice, that a second vehicle, an actual military-looking truck, dark green, had arrived and parked behind the DOT pickup, and that when a car had come up from the other direction and tried to turn onto Miller, the crew had waved it off and it had driven away without argument. Of Unit 17, there was nothing to report. The door remained closed. No one came out. The second night was worse than the first, in some ways. In other ways, it was better. It was worse because we had time now to think, and thinking is the enemy. It was better because we had a shape to what we were doing. We had jobs, we had a plan. We had each other, in a way we hadn't the day before. I slept 2 hours. I woke up because the radio in my ear had changed. The looped announcement had stopped. In its place, a woman was reading news. I sat up and I turned the volume up and I listened. She was reading a list of counties under quarantine. Ours was on it. She was reading the number of confirmed cases in the state, which was a number I do not want to repeat because I do not know if it was accurate, and because if it was accurate, it was worse than anything I had let myself believe. She was reading instructions. Stay indoors, report the sick. Do not attempt to leave quarantine zones. She was reading, at the end, a phone number for people who had lost family members and wanted to file a report. She said file a report, not get help, not find your family. File a report. I turned the radio off. I got up. I went to the window. The sky was starting to lighten. In the loop road, I could see Doug's silhouette in his chair, still facing Unit 17. He raised a hand when he saw me at the window. I raised one back. I made coffee. I drank it. I opened my notebook and I looked at the list I had made 2 days before, and I added new lines. Under medications, I added insulin 5 days, heart 9 days, oxygen power dependent. Under water, I added monitor well. Under baby, I added formula stretched. Under road, I added military truck. Under Unit 17, I added a question mark. Under a new heading, which I called simply If, I wrote, if power fails, generator lasts. Hours per tank. If well fails, 60 gallons for 62 households is 1 day. If barricade opens, do we go or stay? If barricade doesn't open in a week, then what? I stared at that last line for a long time. Then what? It was the real question. Everything else was arithmetic. That one was a decision. I want to be clear about something. I did not think we were going to die. I want to say that plainly. I thought, and I still think, that if we were careful, if we were kind to each other, if we did not do anything stupid, We would probably survive the next week, maybe the next 2, maybe longer. What I did not know, and what I still do not know, is what the world would look like on the other side of that. Whether there would be a truck coming with supplies, whether there would be a doctor, whether the barricade would ever come down, whether, if it did come down, the town on the other side of it would still be there. That was the shape of it. Survival wasn't the question. Continuation was. That afternoon, Ray came up onto my porch and told me a car had stopped at the barricade. Not from our side, from the outside. A man had gotten out, and he had argued with the crew, and the argument had gone on for a long time, and eventually the man had gotten back into his car and driven away. Ray thought the man had a child in the back seat. I asked Ray if the crew had let him through. Ray said no. I asked Ray if the crew had told him where to go. Ray said he couldn't tell from that distance, but the man had driven west, back toward the county line, and if the county line was also barricaded, then the man was going to be driving in circles until he ran out of gas. I thought about that man for a long time. I still think about him. I do not know his name, and I never will. I hope he found somewhere. I hope the child in the back seat was all right. I hope, and I have to hope, because hoping is one of the last things you have when you cannot help. On the third day, the power flickered. It went off for maybe 40 seconds and then came back. Everyone in the park noticed. I saw porch lights across the loop wink and return. Doug was at the shed within 5 minutes, checking the generator, and he called me over and we went through the fuel supply together. We had 2 5-gallon cans, plus what was in the tank. He said, generously, that we had maybe 24 hours of runtime if we ran the generator continuously, and considerably more if we only ran it for the essentials, the well pump, the woman in Unit 39's refrigerator for her insulin, the old man in Unit 51's oxygen concentrator, and one shared freezer we had set up in the laundry building for the medications that couldn't get warm. I asked him what he'd do if the power failed for real. He said, rotate, run it 4 hours on, 4 off, prioritize the medicine. I said, and the oxygen? He said, we'd have to talk to him. His backup tanks would buy time. He'd have to sleep with the machine on and be off it during the day when the generator's off. I said, he's 80-something. He said, I know. Neither of us said what we were both thinking. The power did not fail that day. It flickered twice more, and then held. I don't know why it flickered. I never found out. I don't know if it was the beginning of something or the tail end of something. It just flickered, and then it didn't, and we went on. On the 4th morning, Priya came to my office and told me quietly that she thought a man in Unit 29 had a fever. I asked how she knew. She said his wife had come to ask for aspirin. His wife had said he'd been achy since yesterday, and now he was warm and confused about the day of the week. I asked what Priya thought. She said she thought we should isolate them, not force them, ask them. I went to Unit 29 with Priya. His wife opened the door. She had a mask on, which she must have found somewhere in the house, and she was holding it with both hands like it might blow off. Behind her, I could see her husband sitting on the couch. He looked at me and he smiled a little and he said hello, and he used my name, which he almost never did. And I said hello back, and I watched his eyes, and his eyes did not focus quite right on mine. I asked his wife, out on the porch, if she would be willing to stay in the house with him, not to open the door for anyone, and to talk to us through the window twice a day. I told her we would leave food and water on the porch. I told her we would not come inside unless she asked us to. She said yes. She said, is he going to be okay? I said, I don't know. She said, would you tell me if you knew? I said, yes. She nodded. She closed the door. Priya and I walked back to the office in silence. That night, another alert came through. Medical resupply will be delivered to designated distribution points between 0800 and 1000. Residents should remain indoors. Authorized personnel only may approach delivery vehicles. List of distribution points attached. The list was in a link. The link didn't load. I tried 3 times. Then I gave up and I tried the emergency hotline again, and this time it rang, and this time someone picked up. He sounded exhausted. He said, "State emergency line. What's your county?" I told him. He said, "Distribution point for your area is the fire station on Route 12. I said, "Route 12 is on the other side of the barricade." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Hold, please." He came back after a minute. He said, "For your specific location, they will bring supplies to the barricade. Send one authorized representative to receive them, between 0800 and 1000. I said, "Authorized by whom?" He said, "By yourself, by your community. Someone the crew at the barricade recognizes and trusts. Do you have a manager or a coordinator in your community?" I said, "That's me." He said, "Then that's you." I said, "What are they bringing?" He said, "Basic medical. Insulin if you've reported a need. Blood pressure, some antibiotics, water, non-perishable food. Not much. Prioritize." I said, Is anyone coming to get the sick ones out?" He was quiet again. Then he said, "Sir, at this time, all patients are being managed in place. Field hospitals are being set up, but they are not currently accepting transfers from quarantine zones." I said, "So there's no one coming?" He said, "For medical transport, no, not at this time." "I'm sorry." I said, "Thank you." I hung up. I went to Unit 29 that night. I stood outside the window, and I told his wife what the man on the phone had said. She listened. She did not cry. When I was done, she said, "Bring me whatever fever medicine you can. And if you have any of the antibiotics, ask for them. I don't know if they'll help, but I'd like to try." I said I would. I did not sleep that night either. I sat at my desk and I made a new list. Not of supplies, of people. I wrote down every household in the park, and I wrote down what I knew about them. Their names, their ages, their conditions, what they had, what they needed, what they could give. I wrote until my hand cramped, and then I switched to my other hand, and I kept writing. Somewhere in the middle of that list, I understood something that I had not let myself understand before, which was that I loved these people. Not romantically, not even in the way you love your family, in a stranger way, in the way you love something you have taken responsibility for. Mrs. Alderman with her thyroid pills, Marcus and Deja with a baby, Trish and her 3 dogs, Cy, who I had failed, Helen, who I had also failed, the man in Unit 29 whose eyes had not quite focused, his wife who had thanked me through a closed door, Ray with his shotgun on his lap in a folding chair on the loop road, Doug at the generator, Priya with her notebook, Lena at her phone. I loved them, and I was going to fail some of them, maybe most of them, and I could not stop it, and I had to keep going anyway. At 7:45 the next morning, I walked to the barricade with a wheeled utility cart and Ray at my shoulder. Ray did not bring his shotgun. We had talked about that. He said he understood. He said he would leave it at the office. He did. The crew at the barricade was different from the first day. 2 of them in what looked like military uniforms. 1 older man in a windbreaker with a clipboard. Their vehicle was different too. A bigger truck, olive green with a canvas back. The man with the clipboard raised his hand to us at 20 feet. He said, "Stop there." We stopped. He said, "Are you the coordinator?" I said I was. He said, "Names of persons requiring medication." I read the list. He wrote as I read. He said, "Anyone with symptoms?" I said yes. I gave him the 2 names, the man in Unit 29, and when he pressed, I told him about Helen and Cy in Unit 17, and about the fact that I did not know what was inside that trailer anymore, and about the fact that I had not been back to check. He wrote it all down. He did not react. He said, "We will note it. We are not able to send personnel inside at this time. Do you have any other symptomatic individuals?" I said not that I knew of. He said, "If anyone else develops symptoms, keep them isolated in their residence. Do not attempt to move them. Do not attempt to treat them beyond basic comfort care. Report to us at the next resupply. Understood? I said, how often are the resupplies? He said, every 4 days for now, subject to change. I said, change to what? He didn't answer. He and one of the soldiers unloaded boxes onto the cart. Not many. A cardboard flat of bottled water, 2 paper sacks of what looked like MREs, a small plastic bin with pharmacy bottles inside, a separate bag with what he told me was insulin, packed with cold packs. He said, the insulin needs refrigeration within 2 hours. I said, we have refrigeration. He said, good. He handed me a sheet of paper. He said, this is a symptom guide. If anyone in your community shows any of the items on the second column, isolate them immediately and report at the next resupply. Do not attempt to transport them yourselves. I looked at the sheet. I did not read it then. I folded it and put it in my back pocket. He said, one more thing. I looked up. He said, there will come a point in this response when we will need to reassess perimeter integrity. If that happens, you may be asked to consolidate. All residents may be asked to move to a single structure or a small number of structures. This is for your safety. Have you thought about which structure that would be? I said, the laundry building. It's cinder block. It has water. It has a bathroom. He said, how many can it hold? I said, comfortably, 20, in an emergency, 60, maybe. He said, good. Start thinking about that scenario. He nodded to me. The soldier nodded to me. They got back in their truck. Ray and I turned the cart around and walked back into the park with the water and the food and the medicine and the paper sheet in my back pocket that I had not yet read. Ray, who had been quiet the whole time, said as we walked, he didn't say when this would end. I said, no. Ray said, he didn't say it was going to end. I said, no. We walked the rest of the way in silence. I read the sheet later in my office with the door locked and the radio off. It was 1 page, 2 columns. The first column was labeled Early Symptoms: fever, headache, confusion, fatigue, muscle aches, loss of appetite. Nothing you couldn't get from a bad flu. The second column was labeled Progression Symptoms. I am not going to write out what was in the second column. I read it once, and then I folded the sheet, and I put it in the top drawer of my desk, and I have not looked at it since. I understood, reading it, why the alert had said what it had said about not attempting to restrain anyone. I understood why the crew wouldn't come inside our park. I understood why the man on the phone had said all patients were being managed in place. I understood a lot of things I would rather not have understood. We are on day 9 now. I am writing this in the office in the evening with the radio on low in the corner. The loop is quiet. Doug is at the generator. Ray is on the road. Priya is with the man in Unit 29's wife, who called me on her landline this morning and told me her husband had gotten worse in the night and asked if I could send someone to stand outside her window because she did not want to be alone. The man in Unit 29 died this afternoon. I do not know if it was the illness or something else. His wife has locked herself in the back bedroom of the trailer and asked us not to enter for at least 24 hours. We are honoring that. Priya is on her porch with a folding chair and a book, so that his wife knows someone is there. We have not lost anyone else. Yet. The 2 units that did not respond turned out to have people inside. One was the woman who worked nights, who was fine and had been sleeping through everything and was mortified when I finally reached her. The other was a household I had not known was staying with family in another state. So we are 59 households of the living, minus Cy and Helen in Unit 17, whose door has still not opened, and minus the man in Unit 29, whose door I will help open tomorrow. 59 households and 1 baby and 3 dogs, and a woman who used to have a husband. The barricade is still up. The road is still closed. Another resupply is coming in 3 days if the schedule holds. The power has flickered twice more and held. The well is still working. The insulin is in the freezer in the laundry building. The oxygen tanks in Unit 51 have been refilled once off the shared generator, and the man who uses them thanked me by baking bread for the whole loop, which he distributed in paper bags on his porch rail because we are all trying not to touch each other's hands. I do not know how this ends. I do not know if the barricade will come down in a week or a month or a year, or ever. I do not know if the town on the other side of Miller Road still has a functioning grocery store, or a functioning clinic, or a functioning school where the Hoban twins can eventually go back to. I do not know if my sister is alive. Her last text from 6 days ago said, "We're okay, staying put, love you," and nothing since. The delivery indicator still shows sent, not delivered, on every message I have sent her since. I do know a few things. I know that when the emergency alert finally came, hours after the barricade went up, it was not because they didn't know sooner. It was because they had decided what to tell us and when. I know that the men at the end of the road are, for the most part, decent and are also there to keep us in, and that both of those things can be true at once. I know that our safety, such as it is a temporary shape held together by generator fuel and bottled water and the willingness of 62 households to check on each other twice a day and to not, so far, panic. I know that I have made mistakes. I stood in Helen's bedroom without a mask. I walked to 40 other doors after that. I closed a trailer door on a sound I still hear at night. I promised a woman I would tell her the truth if I knew it, and I did not, technically, lie to her. But I did not tell her everything I suspected, and I do not know if that was mercy or cowardice or both. I know that the collapse the alert warned about is not out there somewhere, coming for us. It is here, in this park. In the small ways things stop working and the smaller ways we hold them together. It is in the flicker of the power. It is in the folded paper in my desk drawer. It is in the empty chair on the road where Ray sits in the mornings and Doug sits in the afternoons, and I sit at night when I cannot sleep. I know that the world I lived in on the morning of that Tuesday, the world where recycling trucks came on schedule and school buses stopped at corners and phone calls went through, is not coming back the way it was. Whatever comes next will be different, smaller, more careful, closer. And I know that when the resupply truck comes in 3 days, the man with the clipboard is going to ask me again about the laundry building, and I'm going to have a real answer for him about how 62 households can live in one cinder block room. And I do not have that answer yet, and I do not know if I will have it by then. But I will have to try. Because outside my office window, the loop road is quiet and the porch lights are on, and somewhere in Unit 8, a baby is crying and being shushed. And somewhere in Unit 51, an old man is asleep with a plastic tube in his nose that hisses softly in the dark. And somewhere in Unit 44, a woman is sitting on her floor with 3 dogs pressed against her legs and a phone in her hand that will not connect to her children. And all of them, are counting on someone to keep the lights on and the water running and the medicine cold for one more night. And tonight, that someone is me. Tomorrow, it will be Ray. And the night after, Doug. And the night after that, Priya, who has never asked to lead anything in her life, and who is quietly and without ceremony becoming the person this park cannot do without. We will trade the watch. We will make the list longer. We will bury the man in Unit 29 in the corner of the park where the ground is soft, and we will do it with his wife's permission, and we will do it carefully, and we will do it with masks on, because that is what the folded paper in my drawer tells us to do. And when the next alert comes, whenever it comes, whatever it says, we will read it, and we will fold it, and we will put it away, and we will keep going. Because the road is barricaded, and the alert came too late, and the world outside is a shape we can no longer see clearly, and the only thing left to do, for as long as we can do it, is to keep 62 homes standing in the horseshoe of a loop road, one flickering porch light at a time. That is where I am tonight. That is where I will be tomorrow. And when someone eventually asks me, months or years from now, what it was like when the collapse began, I will not tell them about the sirens or the alerts or the men in the reflective vests. I will tell them about the wind chime that was still ringing on the second afternoon in someone's yard, on a day when nothing else in the world seemed to be working the way it used to. I will tell them it kept ringing, and I will tell them we kept going. And I will not tell them how it ended, because it has not ended yet, and I do not know if it will end in my lifetime, and I have made my peace, most days, with not knowing. Most days. Not all of them, but most.